everyone, welcome to another top 10 list, and this was probably one of the hardest ones I've ever had to put together. Not because I had to think, oh god, what's going to be my 10, what's going to be my 9? No, it was just difficult to get 10 in the first place. This is my top 10 endgame conditions in board games, and this was a Patreon request, but I didn't realise just how limited in scope this was going to be. There's not a lot of ways that a game can end. For the most part, most games, particularly Euro games, will end by reach 100 victory points, or it will be a case of race to the finish, or it will be right, play 6 rounds and then whoever has the most points is the winner. You know, that is the most common thing you get, and given that I like to use this meme a lot, of course, you can see how common it is. I wanted to think, alright, well, what are my top 10 games where the endgame trigger is not quite as simple as that, where there's a bit more to it, some variant that makes it more enjoyable or more interesting than your average 6 rounds and count up to 100 points. It's also important to note a caveat I have with this list is that for the most part, bar one example, I have excluded co-ops, because co-ops could have all sorts of different ways that the game can end, and it's usually based on you fulfilling an objective based on what the game is trying to do to win. That's kind of different. I'm really mainly talking about competitive games, but I do have one exception on the list which I hope will still be valid in your eyes. We'll get to that a bit later. But the problem was, when I went to do the list, I realised there just isn't a lot of triggers out there. This is top 10, but it could also just be called the 10. It really is tricky. The People's Choice only made my point even more clear on this fact, where I thought, there really isn't a lot of different games here, so we're going to get a lot of overlap, I think. But like I say, the Patreons wanted this list, and hopefully you'll get some enjoyment out of it just watching me rant and rave about games. That is what you're here for, right? So without further ado, let's get on with it. Now my number 10 would require me to go out to the back and get a massive game off the shelf, which is not happening, so you'll just have to rely on pictures. But this one is a bit of a cheat really, because it requires an expansion for this to work, hence I'm only letting it squeak onto the list at number 10, and that is Scythe with the Wind Gambit expansion. In normal Scythe, there's not much of a difference in endgame trigger. It's basically whoever gets to 6 stars ends the game and then you tally up the points. Okay, but that's pretty boring, isn't it? Well, with the Wind Gambit expansion, ignoring the airships part of it, which is already pretty cool, you also have a lot of different endgame tiles. It essentially changes up the game in such a way that the game will end in a much different fashion than just simply getting 6 stars. Sometimes it may be that you have to get a certain amount of stars, but then there'll be some other aspect to it. There's one where the game ends in 24 turns straight like that. Okay, not particularly interesting, but then you get other ones where as soon as somebody gets to so and so stars, you have a couple more turns, then the factory explodes, and then it's whoever who got closest to the factory gets some extra scoring. There's a King of the Hill version. There's a lot of these different tiles that just make the end game part of Scythe a lot more interesting than just the base set version. It's not a revolutionary change, I get it, but it still works. The end game tiles do make a difference in making Scythe more enjoyable. I will use them pretty much all the time, even when teaching the game, because frankly it's just a couple of rules changes and that's all you need to know. But as I say, squeaking onto the list because technically you need an expansion in order to make this work. But like I say, you try finding 10 to go on this list. Trust me, this was harder than it seemed, okay? Give me a break. Cut me some slack, please.
Oh, my heart bleeds!
Now my number 9 could go for a lot of different games, so I'm going to mention a couple, and if I come across examples like this I'll do the same later on. But essentially this endgame trigger revolves around the ticking clock of doom, where you know the game is going to end soon but you don't entirely know when, and it's not just simply the roll of a die. Your best example you can think of is probably Ethnos. However, the one I'm using is Spike, but there's a lot of other games that could use this as well. Spike is a pick up and deliver train game. Yeah, I know, huh? Luke liking a pick up and deliver train game. What's up with that? Maybe I'll have to explain this to you at some point with a proper video, but nah, ain't got time for that.
I'm the doctor. Just accept it.
So with Spike, you carry on, you pick up and deliver goods and lay out your train tracks, but then by the end of the game, you're drawing cards from this deck, and there are 3, I think, whistles inside the deck. You shuffle them into the bottom third, and the idea is that when the third one is drawn, game outright ends. No extra, have 1 round before the game ends. No, it's done. The game ends. Ethnos has a very similar concept where you shuffle 3 dragon cards into the deck, except in Ethnos it happens every round as opposed to just the end of the game. But like I say, pick your poison whichever game you like more. I personally prefer Spike. Ethnos is fine, I like the game, but it's kind of fallen a bit for me. I liked it more at first, now it's kind of got a little bit dull. I think it really badly needed an expansion, not to mention a second edition, ugly as sin. But, you know, well, this one's not exactly much of a looker, I suppose I can't compare. But Spike, you know, and games like Ethnos and Spike where you have that endgame trigger are always a good laugh, because you're there thinking, right, I gotta finish my go, and then suddenly the first one gets drawn, and there's like, okay, right, better get a move on. And then the second one gets drawn and it's like, I don't know. It's like, how many turns have I got? 1, 2? Is it the last card of the deck? I don't know, but I need to hurry up. Please, come on. One more thing, and then the third one gets drawn, and yeah, and the game ends 1 or 2 rounds before you wanted it to. It inevitably happens, but it's a cool system. Fairly, like, basic. I mean, it is basically just, oh, well, a couple of cards in the deck and that, but it's a lot better than simply just saying, oh, the deck runs out and then end. You know, so they do add a nice bit of tension, but it is a fairly basic concept. But still, I don't know what I'm supposed to really call these, like, entries on my top 10. We'll just say my number 9 is Ethnos and Spike, the ticking clock of doom. My number 8 can be best summarised by the use of these. They're so nice. Big, chunky dice. I like these. Excuse me one moment. Hey, I'm a lonely guy, give me a break. But Seasons is what I call the better version of Res Arcana. I know Res Arcana is high on people's lists and they think, oh, it's really cool and it's really simple and it's really nice. Yeah, well, this did it better originally, so stick with Seasons.
Kill him. Kill him now.
The win with this is that in the 3-year timer that you have for the game, not 3 year, literally 3 years in the game, that is, you have to draft dice, and the die that is left over dictates how fast the timer moves through the 4 different seasons, which dictate what mana is readily available. So the idea is that when you get to the end of year 3, you're not entirely certain whether the game will go on another 1, 2, maybe even 3 rounds, because it's determined by what players decide to do. It's different from the one before, where the randomness will dictate the end of the game. Here though, you're looking at the dice left and you're like, there's a 1 pip there and a 3 pip there. That means if I take this die, then it's probably going to move slow, but then if I really want that other die. So if I take that die, that means there's a chance that my partner is going to say that the game's going to end next round. I don't know if I want it to end that round. Maybe I should draft the die. And I like that the extra player aspect is what drives you to dictate the end of the game. And there's even a card in here, and in fact the expansion adds 1 or 2 others like that, where the game allows you to shift that timer. Temporal Boots, I think the card is called. It allows you to shift it forward or back up to 3 spaces. If you're playing only the base game, you'll see that item a lot, and you've always got to fear that that card could come up. You know you need another 2 or 3 rounds to really get that powerful card out, but then if somebody plays the Temporal Boots when it gets to the last season and then fast forward it, it's like, uh-oh, that's a problem. But then I've done the exact same thing where it's like, look, I need more time to play this card, so you know what, you thought the game was going to end? Well, I'm just going to rewind time back 3 bits. Now we get to have another couple rounds that you lot don't want, but I get to filch all your points for. So it's, like I say, it's a loose way of just determining basically an endgame timer, but because the players have direct influence over when the game can end, it just pips the randomness one by a little amount. So it is kind of like the ticking doom clock, but it's the ticking doom clock bracket with less randomness. I don't know. I'll have to think of some better names in the post-edit, but you know, Seasons, love the game, just played it last night in fact with my friends, really good fun, and I like the player-derived endgame trigger in this one. My number 7 is an interesting one. I don't own this game. In fact, I've only played it a couple of times. I like it, but I just think it goes on too long, even when you play the shorter version of it. But I couldn't not put it on this list because the endgame trigger in this is definitely unique to it, and it's one of its better selling points. It's Archipelago. Archipelago is this massive Euro game where you're controlling, well, different archipelago islands, you're gathering resources, and very much everything you do in a normal Euro. The twist with this, though, is that at the start of the game, each player is shuffled an objective with a not only an endgame trigger, but also a VP scoring criteria, and it's done in secret. So each player has their own unique card. The game will carry on when somebody meets one of those endgame triggers. The problem is, they're all unique. you don't know A, what triggers are out there, or B, what trigger any other players might have. So when you play this game relatively new, you've got no idea when the game could end. It could just shock you at any moment, and then even the scoring could be pretty unique because you don't know exactly what the other free scoring opportunities are. Now, this does create a little bit of a flaw in the system, which is why it's not higher up on the list, which is if you are new to the game, you are kind of in the dark. You don't really know exactly when the game's going to end at all. You know, it's not like you know what these objectives are. But for those who have played the game quite a lot, and I do know some people like that, I get that when you know what objectives could appear, your knowledge of thinking, well, that objective exists, I noticed that that pile of resources is draining quite fast. I don't know, is the game going to end? I need to be wary of this. And it's like, a bit of uncertainty when you have a bit of knowledge of the game is a really cool, unique system. There's not a lot of games that use, if any at all that I can think of anyway, that utilize this system. And it would be higher, like I say, if it wasn't just for the fact that it requires quite a decent knowledge of the game for it to work at its best. But even if you are relatively new, it is cool to have not only a unique way that the game can end every single game, you know, depending on how many players you've got, you'll have different endgame triggers available, so you never quite know exactly how the game will end. It will throw a nice surprise at you. And then of course, you might think you're going to score really well until you find out that the other free scoring opportunities from the other players kind of suck for you. But everybody's got that issue. So if you are familiar with the game, you're almost trying to suss out what possible cards the other players might have and then try and gear yourself towards that scoring opportunity. Again, that slight flaw caveat where you do have to be quite knowledgeable with the game. But it's a cool system. It's something I'd like to see done more, maybe in a more streamlined game with a few tweaks here and there. It's something that I think has a lot of potential to work well. It's just a shame that we haven't seen many examples of it. So the secret hidden endgame trigger. My next game, I kind of realised I've not played this in a while. I really need to get it to the table again. The problem is that if you're new to the game, you're kind of on the back foot compared to someone who knows what they're doing in this. But it deserves to be on the list. I enjoy it, and that is the somewhat, shall we say, art divisive game of Inish. Now, you know, I like the art in this. I don't think it's amazing, but I don't think it's bad either. But certainly you've got some people who love it to bits and some people who don't. But the endgame trigger in this is not so much what can be the endgame triggers, because you don't play for victory points, you just play to outright victory, and it's pretty straightforward, like control so many areas or have so many sanctuaries out, that kind of thing. That's not the unique twist here. The twist is what I like to call here the announcement endgame trigger, which is when a player meets one of those endgame conditions, they pretty much announce to the rest of the group, I'm going to win next turn, and take a token to say that if you don't stop me in a turn, I'm going to win. So it basically forces everybody else to suddenly paint a giant bullseye on the player to say, right, okay, get him, get him now. And it creates a really cool dynamic where suddenly somebody gets to a point where they're going to win, others try to stop them, but then other players start saying, well, I'm going to win next turn, now stop me. It's like, well, I'm going to win next turn, stop me now. And eventually somebody is going to pull through, and it's like, oh, really tense and good when that happens. But yeah, the fact that you have to directly announce I'm going to win, yeah, you could argue that maybe if you, I mean, I didn't include racing games on the list, but you could argue that there are certain games where it's like, oh, there's a condition you have to get to and I'm going to get my 8th next turn. But then, not necessarily. I mean, let's say the game is you have to get 10 of something out in front of you. You might have 9 things out, but it's not necessarily the case that you'll get your 10th thing out next turn. Here, though, you actively have to say, well, I'm winning at the moment, therefore, stop me.
No, you can't. Don't even try.
The one flaw I have with it, though, is that sometimes the game can drag on with a lot of players if it keeps bouncing back and forth. However, the expansion to this, I forget what it's called, but it basically adds a new module where you basically shorten the game by saying that as soon as somebody says, I'm going to win, there's then only so many turns left in the game, or there's like, it basically stops it bouncing back and forth. And I recommend you use that module all the time. I think it's called the King is Dead or the King is something, I don't know, I think it's the King is Dead module, but either way, the game is a really cool one. It's underrated, I feel. I don't think it gets quite enough buzz because it is a very unique style of game, but it's a good amount of fun, and as I hold it now, I'm kind of feeling like I want to get this to the table at some point soon, but To be honest, I say that a lot of games in my collection. Who'd be a board game collector, eh? So yeah, Inish, the announcement, the I'm going to win announcement endgame trigger. I don't know what names to pick. You come up with better ones in the comments. Now before we continue with this top 10, please, if you like the video, please consider leaving a thumbs up on it. Not only does it help with the algorithm, but it also lets me know personally how much you appreciate the content, and it means the world to me. Also, don't forget that this channel is sponsored by Zatu.co.uk. If you look in the description, you'll find my code for 5% discount off your entire basket of games, no matter how many you purchase. Maybe something on my top 10 list has taken your fancy and you've been considering getting it for some time. Go on Zatu, find the game, purchase it, use the code. Not only does it help keep this channel alive with more review copies, but you will save yourself some pennies along the way, and as we know, board games are getting expensive these days. Now, on with the rest of the top 10. Now, my number 5 is that one exception to the rule I mentioned earlier, which is that the endgame trigger is from a co-op game. Yeah, co-ops are kind of their own thing. Meet the objective, win. Meet the objective, win. Same as that. Here though, the endgame trigger is such a prominent part of the game, I couldn't just ignore it for the purposes of this list. And, you know, beating the bad guy in this is certainly important, but then you could just scare the living daylights out of them. Of course, I'm talking about one of my new favorites at the moment, Spirit Island. Spirit Island, you are playing one of these giant spirits and chasing invaders off the island with the help of the native inhabitants. I'm not even going to try to pronounce them because I'll probably get it wrong. But with this one, the endgame trigger depends on the terror level. When you play this game and play cards, you can, and take out towns and cities, you generate fear. And this fear, as you go through like a fear pool of tokens, you generate fear cards that give you some kind of benefit on future turns. It's a pretty cool mechanic and very thematic. But in order to win the game, as you go through these fear cards, you increase the terror level. And the terror level dictates on what the endgame trigger is. So in the initial stages of the game, you have to get rid of every invader off your island. Good luck doing that. You need to have not only the right spirits, but also luck and the moons and that have to basically align for you in order for that to work. Not saying it's not doable, I've even done it once, but yeah, things have got to go very well for you. So what happens is that you get to terror level 2 and it says, right, you don't have to worry about the explorers, the little men, but you do have to get rid of the towns and cities. It's still hard, but it's doable. Then you get to terror level 3 and you only have to care about the cities. Okay, I can ignore all these towns then. Great, I think I'll just get that rid of that 1 or 2 cities over there and then I can win. Or the favourite way I like to win, you get to the next one after, which is just outright fear victory. You have scared the bejesus out of all the invaders and they run from the island. I've said this on that top 10 I did with One Pit Wonder with Jonah, that the spirits I like to play generally generate a lot of fear because I like to win by scaring the opponent. Yes, I have won this game many times by doing kill enough invaders depending on the terror level, but my outright favourite is just to blitz through that fear deck and say, look, I have basically just strapped you down to a chair, Clockwork Orange style, and stapled the face-up, close-up picture of a spider's eyes. Yeah, be scared, get off my island. Trust me, if you did that to me, I literally would be traumatized for life. But, you know, with this one, I thought that was just a bit more interesting from an endgame trigger perspective. Yeah, you're trying to chase off the invaders, but how many invaders depends on what you're doing in the game. So it's player controlled, it's also maybe something you're aiming for, maybe something you're not even aiming for. Maybe I don't really care about the fear level, in which case I better start killing invaders left and right. But if you're someone like me, fear is important to you, therefore you're going to blitz through and go for that ultimate fear victory. I like the fact that it's somewhat different, and because it's such an important part of the game, you know, how you actually win, and it can be done at different stages, I thought that Spirit Island deserved an honourable mention on this list. Well, more than an honourable mention, it's my number 5. What to call it? I don't know, the fear trigger. We just call it that for now. Spirit Island for my number 5 pick. Boy oh boy, if I did not put this one on the list, I probably would be flogged by the people and then some. Yeah, of course I've got to put Rajas of the Ganges somewhere on this list, but I think there are 3 games that have better endgame triggers. With this one, it is very much essentially a victory point trigger, so you might be crying foul, but this one is definitely unique to this game and it makes it stand out. It's like one of the first things that people think of when they look at Rajas of the Ganges. The idea is that there are 2 separate tracks that you're doing. You're basically basically, it's a dice placement game. You're building up a little mini-map of Carcassonne in front of you, you're activating markets, using these different coloured dice as a kind of like currency per se, and you're generating money as well as fame. But the idea is that it's a race to when the two tracks align. So there's one counter measuring money, which you need to do various actions, but it's also part of the endgame trigger. But then when you activate bits of your Carcassonne minimap in front of you, you get fame. And that's a different track that goes at twice the rate, but you don't get the points. Well, it goes at twice the rate, but you tend to get half as many fame points as you do income, and a kind of balancing act. But the cool thing is that the track's going this way for money, and the track's going this way for fame. So eventually the two are going to meet. But when you've got high fame and low money, or when you've got bang in the middle, or when you've got high income but very little fame, doesn't matter. Once the two meet, that's the endgame trigger, you win. It's a cool concept, and not one that I've seen done anywhere at all. And honestly, I'm kind of confused as to why. I feel like this would be easy to implement in any kind of civilization game, I guess. If you could like balance your wealth of a city with the happiness of your population, get them to meet in the middle, you win. You know, is that not doable in a game? I don't know, designers, get on that. But yeah, it's a really cool little concept, and granted, the one caveat with this is that I tend to see it end more in a 50-50 balance, or high income and low fame, than I do seeing it as high fame and low income. I'm not entirely sure I've ever seen it happen that way. But it's cool the fact that that meeting point is going to be different for every player, and you can see people sort of creeping up towards it, and it's like, well, how do I get to it? Do I boost my income all of a sudden, or do I try and get a few fame points? Which is it going to meet in the middle quicker as a result? And like I said before, whenever you say to someone, oh yeah, what do you remember about Rajas of the Ganges? If they don't say big colourful chunky dice on a big Buddha, they basically say the whole victory point endgame condition with this. So what to call it? I don't know, meeting in the middle, endgame trigger? Like I say, these are rubbish names. But yeah, Rajas of the Ganges definitely deserves a high spot on this number 4. But number 3, what am I going to call this one? I don't know. You can never have too many endgame conditions. Never too much of a good thing? Too much of a good thing? I don't know. But basically, this is one of my favourite Euro games that there is. It's got theme, but you kind of have to inject a fair bit of roleplay into it. But this surprised me to no end how much I enjoyed it. And that is the big one, yep, Vindication on my shelf there.
Who?
I'm not going to get that out, it's way too big and I'd have to take out half those boxes. But Vindication is a great Euro game where you arrive on this island, you're basically a scumbag, and you try to vindicate your own lifestyle. How you do it though is entirely up to you. It's a sandbox Euro. Am I going to go vanquish a ton of monsters? Go ahead. Am I just going to get a party of followers and just go do stuff? Okay, great. I'll get a bunch of relics like Tomb Raider. Go ahead, develop my personality, fine. Ride Mothra, the final level of the mount, great. Control all the locations that they're all mine, okay, great. Do what you like. I love sandbox games, and this is like the epitome of a Euro sandbox game with a decent amount of theme thrown in. Really cool game. But the endgame triggers, that's an interesting story by itself. The idea is that there's a deck of cards with different triggers on them. And it could be something like get X amount of relics in play, get X amount of traits in play, when someone controls 4 more areas than someone else, when 2 people have become vindicated, when 3 people have got their mounts upgraded to the last level, I don't know, whatever. There's a lot of different, very unique endgame triggers there. You start off with 1. But then around the score track for honor, you have these coin markers, and as soon as the first player passes over each one, you flip over another endgame trigger. So the game can end very surprisingly depending on what gets drawn from the deck. You might draw a card in the first coin that's like, we carry on until someone gets, 3 people have got vindicated. Well, one person's barely there and the rest of them haven't really bothered, so well, the game's probably not going to end anytime soon. But then the second coin marker, you flip over one and it says, next, as soon as you get 5 relics in play. Wow, we've already got 4. Someone's already there being Tomb Raider, and I've got 1 myself. When are we going to trigger this, guys? And so you're thinking, well, will someone trigger it? Do they think that they're going to get enough endgame scoring to suddenly overlap the other players? They don't know. So as well as having that aspect of it just kind of creeping up on you, I love the fact that you can end up with an almost limitless combination of endgame triggers in a game, and depending on what the players are doing as their own personal story that they're telling, it can go a lot of different ways as to how the game will end and when the game will end. I like this concept, and again, I don't see it repeated in a lot of games, whether thematic or Euro or even co-ops. You know, there really should be something that's used more. But like I say, you can end up with a game where there's like 5 or 6 endgame triggers out there. It could end in one of many ways, and yet somebody just isn't getting to one of those triggers. So it does make for a very like large what's the word I'm looking for? A large variance in terms of game length. I mean, your game could end within 60 minutes, it could end within 2.5 hours. It really does depend on those triggers, but it's a cool concept. And as people start passing over those coin markers, you're like, oh, could it end now? Oh, it could, and I have the power to do that. Aha, now I get to control the narrative. Having that kind of thing happen to you is very surprising, but also a good feeling. So Vindication, deserving of my bronze medal at number 3. My number 2, I'm just going to show you the lid because I don't want to accidentally tip out half the contents in there because it is rather bulked up with stuff, and that is Seven Wonders Duel. And the funny thing with this is that I actually got it signed by, I think, Corentin and Bruno Cafala, who were there at the time, to basically draw like a big picture of the military dude, a couple of Pyramid Wonders, and sign it. I don't know if you can see because of the light, but you know, put their signatures and that in there. And this was Essen 2015. Was that my first Essen? Hey, nostalgic memories. Oh well, look forward to the next time I'm back there. Would it be this year? We'll have to see how COVID regulations go, really, but I got a hotel book, so you never know, I could be there. But Seven Wonders Duel for my 2 is the fact that there is 3 major endgame triggers. One is the generic, you get to the end and you count up points, which is the most common way it will end, but you can't rule out the 2 auto-win conditions. And auto-win conditions are a big, cool factor when it comes to endgame triggers. The idea that, yes, chances are you will count up points and you can't, like, ignore points, but you might get crept on by some other victory condition that you cannot ignore. Because in here, you've got military and science. Pick up a bunch of science tokens with the different symbols, and as soon as you get 6 or more different symbols, you win automatically by science. But then you can also progress up this military track, and if you get enough shields in order to overthrow the opponent's defenses, you auto win as well. Granted, I see science win more than military, so it's kind of points, science, military in my games I've had. But again, that's not to say that military doesn't happen. It's happened, and I've done it myself. You know, it's the fact that with this game, which is already fantastic, I mean, it's one of my favorite 2-player games of all time. It was in my top 10 last year, I believe. Will it still be there? Who knows? We'll have to find out in a couple of months, I guess. But with this one, spoiler, well, teaser for you much? Yeah, but with this, I like the idea that you have to consider the auto-win conditions. It's very satisfying to win by one of them, but sometimes I could be that person who wants it to go to points. I've got a bunch of the blue culture buildings, I've got all the points, there's no way the opponent's going to beat me on points. But, uh-oh, that's a lot of science tokens they've got. I need to get rid of those green cards. Where are they? And suddenly yes, you think you're going to win on points, but you have to stop them getting the auto-win condition. And you could aim for it from the start. Chances are you do kind of have to aim for it for the start. But even maybe you were just casually playing. It's like, yeah, don't need to worry. Don't need to worry. And then all of a sudden your opponent picks up 2 triple shield cards. It's like, oh, hang on a minute, there's a little bit more worrying. I better be slightly careful here. And because you've got the idea that some of you can take 2 turns in a row, or if you're playing with the Pantheon expansion, which I do recommend, the idea that you can buy the god powers to do weird shenanigans and stop the flow, so that just because I went first doesn't mean that you're choosing a card next. You might buy a god power and then not choose a card. Too much to explain, but basically read up on the Pantheon expansion. You know, there's a lot of different ways that the endgame trigger can sneak up on you, and it's, like I say, it's a favorite amongst a lot of people, and for those conditions, it definitely deserves a high spot on this top 10, but not quite the top spot. I am so sorry I didn't think of you before. It's my fault. Can you ever forgive me?
You're not sleeping with it, are you, Ray?
Hopefully it can. Yeah, my number 1 is innovation, and the reason I'm kind of doing a soppy apology note here is the fact that when I did my top 10 tiny games list, I forgot about innovation. It's like, whoops. And you're thinking, well, hang on a minute, this box is like way too big, it's not tiny. Yeah, and that's what fooled me, because I have the deluxe version of this game, which has multiple expansions. I forgot that innovation comes in a very tiny, slim box with just the base game in it, and I know for a fact that that would fit in my coat pocket that I did before. So I had to basically just acknowledge that I forgot it. It was my mistake. It would have been very high up on my top 10. I think it would have been in my top 3 easily. And that's why I was like, oh, how did I forget it? Now, I haven't put this as my number 1 just because of that, okay? You know, just because you think, oh, that's so convenient. No. I actually do find the endgame triggers and innovation to be fantastic. It's similar to the Seven Wonders duel aspect, you know, where you've got I'm going to put this down because it's glaring on the light like crazy. But with this one, you've got multiple ways the game can end for a kickoff. That's always good. I like it when there's multiple very different ways. Firstly, you could get the dominations or achievements depending on what version you're playing, and as soon as somebody gets that many achievements, win. Okay, that's the most common way it'll win. But then you've also got the fact that if you draw, you're going through all the different ages. It's basically a card tableau building game where you trigger off all these combos with card abilities, and you're going through different technologies. It's very tactical. You can't really have a strategy in this game because all the different effects come out at different times. You're like, right, how can I best make use of the cards that I've got here? There's a bit of swinginess to it, but I love it to bits. It's such a good one to play, particularly on Board Game Arena. But when you're going through these different decks for the ages, if you draw past age 10, which is the last age, the game just cuts out, finishes, and you total up points in a separate score pile. Not to do with your achievements, a separate score pile. And that score pile tends to fluctuate quite insanely during the game based on what abilities you're using. But then on top of that, you also have auto endgame conditions like with Seven Wonders Duel, except you don't know what they are and you don't know if they'll even turn up. Because in Seven Wonders Duel, you know that science and military exist. They're there from the start of the game. Here though, when you get to age 8, 9 and 10, certain cards have auto endgame conditions. Now some of them are quite difficult to achieve, I must admit. Some of them I've never seen happen, but the fact is that they could happen. You could gear yourself towards it. As soon as you see it appear in your hand, you're like, well, can I meet this condition? Is it worth going for? And there have been times when I've won by the use of those conditions, even when I'm on the back foot. But I'm not even just talking about the fact that, oh, it's just the auto endgame conditions that prop it at number 1. It's the fact that all 3 of these methods are not only distinct, they're also valid. I've seen the game won plenty of times with all 3 of these methods. I still boast about one escapade I had on Board Game Arena recently where I was playing against an opponent and I thought, man, they're just getting the best cards from the start and all the luck's happening with them. They were like 5 achievements to 1. I was losing badly. They just needed 1 more achievement to win and I was on the back foot trying desperately like, yes, I've stopped you for a bit. Oh, great, now you've got that card. All right, now I've stopped you again. Oh, you've got that card. How am I supposed to beat you with this kind of luck? And then, near the end, I realised that if I played a certain combo of abilities in my last turn, not only would it pit me slightly ahead of them on points, like about 5 or 6 points ahead of their turn total, but in doing so, I drain out the entire age 10 pile and force us to draw a card, which means the game automatically ends. I did this on Board Game Arena, went through these abilities, we drew out the entire pile as a result of the abilities, it then said, right, draw another card, oh look, there isn't one, game ends, Luke Hector wins.
So you get nothing! You lose! Good day, sir!
It was such a glorious feeling that you have no idea how much I leapt out of the chair going, yes! At the screen. It was such a moment. This game creates moments like that, and it's because those endgame triggers are so distinct, and as I said, they can just creep up on you unexpectedly. I thought, well, this is going to end by achievements. Wait a minute, no, I could end it by this auto win condition. I'm going to go for it. Ah, it's not going to work anymore. But what about that method? And it's very tactical. I'm not saying from the start I'm going for the science. I'm playing a game, doing the card abilities, and then when I get to that stage, I've got to think, well, how can I possibly win this? Hang on a minute. And that's the thing, it's that revelation of being able to tactically adhere to one of those endgame triggers that easily puts innovation as my number 1 in terms of games with unique endgame triggers. So yeah, whew, that's quite a bit there. And as I say, it was difficult to make this list. You know, trying to find 10 kind of unique, distinct ways that the game can end, that's more than just simply count up your points, you know, was very hard. I'd be very interested to hear in the comments what your suggestions are, assuming that the people's choice doesn't mention them first. So speaking of the people's choice, this was a tricky one to do, guys, I do admit. So as much as there's a lot of overlap here and a couple of very dubious choices, we're going to those, you know, I get that this was tricky, so we'll see just how much there is. Number 10 is seasons. Yep, that little timer that goes round, people agree with me on that one. Number 9 and number 8. What was going through your minds here? I swear you did this just to get a rise out of me, people. Number 9, Great Western Trail. No, I'm going to be calm this time. However, I still don't know why this is on the list. Basically, when you perform, I think it was like the market action in this, you have this track where all the different characters that you can get, the 3 different types of characters that you can get, basically when it gets pushed off the track, it marks the end of the game and you have one more turn. That's literally it. It's just the player goes to the festival, does something, and then the game ends. Granted, I suppose that's similar to a couple of my lower choices, but really? Does that really mean much when you're playing Great Western Trail? I don't know, really. Number 8, and again, why have I got to talk about games I hate on the people's choice? Concordia. This one I actually think is probably worse than Great Western Trail in terms of its endgame condition. All that happens is when somebody builds their 15th building, or I think buys the last personality card or whatever they are from a set, that's it, game ends. I think you get one more round. But that's it? That's basically the same as most generic Euro games. Why is that suddenly an interesting endgame condition, guys, alright? I swear these two were just put on just to hope that I would blow my top talking about 2 absolutely despisable, stupid freaking games. But no, I'm going to move on and be calm. So next up we've got Black Orchestra. I actually can't talk much about this one because I haven't played Black Orchestra. But isn't that a co-op where you're fighting to defeat Hitler in the Second World War thing? So isn't the objective just simply beat Hitler the end? I don't quite get how this one's meant to work. I'm going to need your help in the comments, guys, with this one. But apparently some people voted on it, so it must have something unique. And then not much to really say about the next 6. They basically all overlap with choices I'd already made. Number 6. Vindication. Number 5, Inish. Number 4, Innovation. So they didn't think it quite as highly as how I did it, but, you know, they put it high. 3rd, and this is actually kind of interesting, Scythe. Scythe got number 3. Granted, I get it. When you have that Wing Gambit expansion in there, it does add those cool endgame tiles, but I barely put it at number 10. I mean, to put that above Innovation and Inish and Vindication? That's a little bit surprising, but maybe people just like Scythe a lot. Number 2, Rajas of the Ganges, and number 1, Seven Wonders Duel. So I put it as my number 2, you put it as your number 1, so clearly we're in sync on that one. So yeah, probably the least interesting people's choice ball of all time, but as I say, a very tricky list. Not so much so that can be said for the next top 10 that I'll be doing, which is not a Patreon choice. This is one that I've been said I need to do because eventually I need to get on with my top 100. But before then, I need to do my top 10 of 2020 retrospective list. Yes, after now playing a bunch more games from 2020, will 2020 be less of a sucky year than I thought it was for games? Maybe things have improved. We'll have to see. But if you're on the board game group on Facebook, then look out for my poll that I have put up, where you get to put your entries for the people's choice and rank your favourite games of 2020. So that's it for me on this top 10 list. And again, if you like what you see, please consider leaving a thumbs up. It means the world to me to know you appreciate the content. Also, don't forget, as I said before, this channel is sponsored by Zatu.co.uk. Check out the code in the description, use it on the site and get 5% discount off your whole basket of games, and purchase yourself a great game that I've mentioned on my top 10 today. If you're a fan of my top 10 list and you want to see more, then here's a couple of choices for you. Consider my top 10 essential expansions that I did to kickstart my run of top 10s for this season. But if you're interested in spoilers potentially for the next retrospective list, my top 10 of 2020 from last year is still a good one to watch. Until next time, remember as always, it's only a game. Bye for now.